So then you think, okay, well, so maybe according to what we're saying, now you're putting your hands on your dog and you're like, well, there is an extra layer of flab over the ribs, but how come my vet didn't tell me my dog's fat? How come they didn't say anything? I was just there for his physical exam. They told me he was in great shape. And I do find that veterinarians really just, nobody wants to mention this. Nobody wants to talk about it. Fat is an uncomfortable subject. We certainly don't want to criticize our clients and make them feel bad about how they're feeding their dog or what they're feeding their dog. And so sometimes it just doesn't get mentioned. I think a lot of veterinarians are misinformed about what a healthy, fit dog looks like, because honestly, we're not used to seeing them. Welcome to another episode of the Crunchy Carnivore Podcast with myself, Dr. Jessica Levy, holistic vet, and Melissa Weidenhamer, canine nutritionist and holistic dog breeder. And today we're going to talk about fat dogs.
Fat dogs. Ooh, the obesity epidemic.
I know, that's kind of what everybody calls it. This is like a big thing. I think almost every dog I see is overweight or obese. It's just a very common thing. You probably see this with your clients too, and it's just kind of very common in America. I always think of it as, Americans just kind of like to see a little extra padding on our dogs. But it's very harmful for them.
So when we think about, first of all, we're going to cover a few things throughout this episode, like we usually do. We want to talk about first, why is it a concern, right? If a dog has a few extra pounds, or they're morbidly obese, why, what's the dangers, what's the concerns? And then really what constitutes an obese dog? I think there's a lot of confusion about what that even is.
That's the biggest part. How could you tell?
Yeah. And then obviously we're going to bring some solutions at the end if you want to prevent that from happening for your dog, or maybe you do have a dog that's overweight and you kind of figure that out by the time we're done talking, what can you do about it? So those are the things that we're going to cover today. So first, let's talk about why is there a concern with a dog having some extra weight on them.
And it's pretty much the standard stuff that any vet would tell you. It's hard on their organs, it's hard on their joints, it's hard on the heart, the liver and kidneys suffer. Fat isn't just fat, it's metabolically active, so you can have a lot of hormones that are recirculating because of the fat. It shortens their lifespan. And really reduces their quality of life, right? A fat dog does not really want to go for a walk. They don't really want to do stuff.
Another problem would be, creating a dog to be diabetic. That is a massive undertaking for owners to have to take care of. It's expensive. It's a lot of attention and commitment to
They develop cataracts really quickly, just like human diabetics.
Another thing too is that, fat is storage. And so when you think, we talk a lot here about toxic load, we talk about toxic chemicals and all the things that some of it is just unavoidable that they're going to come into contact with. That's all stored in the fat. So, their risk for cancer goes through the roof as well, because that's really a toxin disease.
Right. Then the question is, what is making our dogs fat?
So there's obviously several factors, just like with people. One of the easiest culprits to go for is the diet. We've talked a tremendous amount here about processed pet food and how in order for kibble to be made and hold its shape, it has to be anywhere from 40 to 70% carbs. And so that incredibly high amount of starch and carbohydrates is going to be put on as fat on your dog, not to mention cause a tremendous amount of inflammation and other problems. But it's just like with people, you eat too many donuts or too much bread, you're going to gain some weight. And so when you're putting that much essentially sugar into a dog, it is very easy for them to put on the pounds. So that's number one.
That's a big one. Lack of exercise, for sure. Although it's the kind of thing where I find that it's probably harder to walk it off your dog than you think without doing any dietary modification. If all you're going to do is exercise the dog more, that's very difficult. Here in this part of the world, coming out of winter, people pretty much expect their dogs to gain weight over the winter. And so when I see dogs in the spring, and I do comment on how fat they are, everybody kind of blows it off like, well, it's been winter. We haven't been able to get out much.
Right.
But then, there are things that we should do to manage their weight during the colder months when the outdoors are less accessible.
So another thing that people may not be aware of, and this information is a little bit newer, it's I think really kind of been 2016 since they've really started to figure this out, the connection between full spay and neuter and dogs really kind of gaining weight a lot easier. They're not, they don't retain the lean muscle mass as easily. They get a little bit doughy, right? Like that's
so when you say full spay and neuter, compared to what?
So compared to leaving an animal intact or receiving a more of a vasectomy or ovary sparing spay where those sex organs remain intact. So the reason that this happens, the reason that full spay and neuter causes dogs to go in this direction is that basically there's a channel that's disrupted. The sex organs are supposed to send signals up to the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland to signal certain things to start or stop. And when you take out the sex organs completely, that channel is disrupted. And so the pituitary gland pumps out something called luteinizing hormone nonstop because there's nothing telling it to stop. Sex hormones are supposed to tell it to, nope, we're good. You don't have to produce luteinizing hormone. Well, what happens then, because those sex organs are the biggest receiver of luteinizing hormone, it hits other organs and other things
now they're
in the
gone.
body. Yeah, so the sex organs are now gone because you've done a full spay and neuter.
They can't give the pituitary that negative feedback that says, okay, we got enough, time to stop.
So now you have, imagine this constant, steady stream of luteinizing hormone that is supposed to start and stop is now not stopping. And where's all that extra luteinizing hormone going to go when you've taken the sex organs away? That's where it's supposed to go. And so there's a couple of other parts of the body that are the bigger receptors after that. And that's going to be your thyroid and your adrenal glands.
Right.
And so you just kind of wreak havoc on the whole body and the whole function of them being able to metabolize and have energy. That's why a lot of people will mistakenly think that full spay and neuter is going to like fix dog behavior because they kind of lose some energy, they lose some drive, but it doesn't necessarily reduce aggression. It could actually make it worse. But that's a whole other conversation.
Right.
For this particular topic, you're affecting the thyroid, you're affecting the adrenals, you're affecting the dog's ability to regulate like glucose levels and all of those kinds of things. And so they're going to put on more weight. So for example, I have two females. One is intact, the other is not. I feed my fully spayed female almost half the amount of food that I feed my fully intact female. Because if I fed her the same amount, she would be fat.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, it kind of dumps your metabolism. For sure.
So those I would think are probably, the biggest causes of obesity, and there's probably other contributing factors, but those are probably the biggest hitters.
So one of the problems that we find is that a lot of people don't know what they're looking for. Like, how do you know if your dog is at a correct weight or not? And so a lot of what I get sometimes is, well, he's a mini golden doodle and he weighs 26 pounds. Is that a good weight for him?
Yeah.
That doesn't compute. Even within a breed, dogs come in different shapes and different sizes, not drastically. And of course, there's a standard. If you read the standard, it would say something like, for example, a female Rottweiler should weigh between whatever it is, 60 and 70 pounds. I'm just guessing. Don't come after me, Rottweiler people. But it depends on the individual dog. Really, it's about your dog. Are they in good body condition? Are they at an appropriate weight? Not comparing them to any other dog, any other standard. So some of the issues that we run into with that is there's a lot of different ideas about what makes a dog, like how do you describe a dog who's in a good body condition? So we see things like you shouldn't be able to see the ribs, or maybe you should only be able to see the last two ribs, or what do dogs look like in the show ring? The show ring kind of requires a fat dog. That's what's going to win. Judges don't want to see any ribs. And so basically, the way that I describe it is you should be able to lay your hands gently on your dog's rib cage without any pressure. Not like this, just like this. Just lay your hand on your dog's rib cage. You should be able to feel the ribs. It should feel like there's nothing between you and those ribs but a layer of skin. Some people find that alarming, but that is typically the first thing that you do to evaluate your dog's weight. So another way to think of it as just the same way that you can easily feel the bones in the back of your hand, you should be able to feel your dog's ribs this easily. You don't need to dig in to feel them. They're right there. If you can feel big grooves between your dog's ribs, your dog is too thin. If your dog's ribs feel like this, kind of puffy, then your dog is too fat. And so you have to get your hands on your dogs. If you have a hairy dog, you cannot tell just by looking at it if it is in good shape or not.
What can be a little confusing
Right.
is that most breeds, we want to see what's called a tuck, which is where they have a waist. So it literally, you can run from underneath their rib cage right behind their front legs, and you kind of slope upward, and there's this nice tuck.
That's like where the waistline would be.
That's where the waistline
where the belly
would be.
is.
Yep. But there are certain breeds that just don't have that waist. So like even that is a little bit tricky to be able to use that. But I would say majority of breeds, that's another good indicator, seeing that nice tuck.
Right. Another way to think about it is, let's say, just imagine that your dog is a shiny black Great Dane. When the dog is across the room from you, you should be able to see every rib. You should be able to see the outline of every single rib. Now, when you put your hand on your dog's back, again, you're just laying your hand gently on the dog's back. Depending on the breed, with some breeds, you should be able to feel the tops of the spinous processes of the vertebra, but it depends on the breed. So that's where you have to say, okay, well, what kind of dog do I have? Different breeds are going to carry muscle differently.
Correct.
Different dogs are shaped differently. Bulldogs always look small. They look like a mini refrigerator. And then you put them on the scale and they weigh like 78 pounds. So I have a very hard time guessing weight with bulldogs. And they are kind of supposed to be stuffed into a small package. So you have to, for that, you have to think about like, what was this breed of dog designed for? And that will dictate what its body shape should be like. So for example, a lot of the bird dogs, Weimaraners, German short hairs, Vizslas, those dogs have thick slabs of muscle on either side of their spine. And so when you put your hand on their back, a lot of times you can't feel the spine because they are so muscular. Similarly, pit bulls are like that. German shepherds should be built like rails because the dogs are designed for different things. German shepherds are designed to trot all day. So they should have big shoulder muscles, big thigh muscles, and kind of like a rail in between. And so that is something where we were just looking at some of the AKC breed standards. So that can be a guide as to how a dog of your dog's breed should be shaped, designed, etc. They're quite detailed, but some of it is not super specific. So some of the breed standards talk about the dog should have a lively expression or something like that. But, you know, to the best of your ability. Like I said, typically put your hands on your dog. That's how you're going to know. And then get used to putting your hands on your dog regularly. So for example, here in Minnesota, we've come out of winter, finally. We are sliding into summer pretty quickly. So a lot of the dogs that put on weight in winter now need to lose that weight. However, halfway through the summer, when people are super active, the dog is swimming, the dog is fetching, the days are long, you're out there every day with the dog. You're able to walk 2 miles because the days are longer. And so halfway through the summer, you might need to feed your dog a little bit more if they have lost so much weight because their activity level increased a lot. Here we have like huge differences between winter and summer.
And so I definitely would kind of just to piggyback on that, I adjust how much I feed depending on what time of year.
100%.
Yep, depending on what time of year it is. So this idea like you should just always feed 3 cups of this food, it should go up and down depending on what your what your dog
And then you have
needs.
to think too, what if you do agility with your dog, but then you get injured and so you're out of agility competition for 4 weeks. Don't keep feeding your dog the same. If their activity level has been cut, you need to cut back on their food intake too. So then you think, okay, well, so maybe according to what we're saying, now you're putting your hands on your dog and you're like, well, there is an extra layer of flab over the ribs, but how come my vet didn't tell me my dog's fat? How come they didn't say anything? I was just there for his physical exam. They told me he was in great shape. And I do find that veterinarians really just, nobody wants to mention this. Nobody wants to talk about it. Fat is an uncomfortable subject. We certainly don't want to criticize our clients and make them feel bad about how they're feeding their dog or what they're feeding their dog. And so sometimes it just doesn't get mentioned. I think a lot of veterinarians are misinformed about what a healthy, fit dog looks like because honestly, like we're not used to seeing them. So that's a big part of it. And then there's so many opinions. So one of the things that I find is that here at least, everybody's in everybody's business around here. People feel very free to comment. And so I warn my clients, like when your dog gets in good shape, your neighbors will start asking you whether you feed your dog or not. Or your mother-in-law will say, that dog is way too thin. And that's how you know you're there. So then the question is, how do you get there? So let's say you are starting with a fat or even obese dog. Can we just feed him a weight management diet?
Right? I mean, that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah. The problem is with weight management diets, especially if it's a dry food, you're still high in carbohydrates, which is what got you there in the first place. And it's a tremendous amount of fiber. Dogs can't process that.
Right.
And then so you're filling it with all of these carbs and fiber. Where's the nutrition, right? Are they actually getting nutrition? It's probably all processed out anyway. And so, Dr. Levy, have you ever seen a prescribed weight management diet actually help a dog?
No. No, honestly, no. And then the problem too is the low fat, dry dog foods. So they're basically trading out a lot of the calories from fat, and dry dog foods are too low in fat anyway, but they're trading out the calories from fat and just replacing them with calories from carbs. You cannot lose weight eating these things. Dogs are carnivores. We've talked about it a million times.
Yep.
The ketogenic diet is kind of right where a carnivore wants to be. So those foods are just, I think they're designed based on how humans think about weight for ourselves, but not really thinking about dogs as carnivores, where the mainstay of their nutrition should come from meat, bone, organs.
And so I think, just to kind of mention something, and we'll talk about this here maybe again in a minute, but the idea that fat makes you fat or fat makes a dog fat is really a very upside down concept. Fat for dogs, when given in the appropriate form, is actually the best energy source for a dog. It also feeds their brain and different parts of their system without putting weight on them. I think you can, but it's just like, at that point, you're just overfeeding them.
Right. It's kind of like these carbohydrate-laden gels that they have for hunting dogs. Like, there are some people who get out there and they hunt all day. You can maybe carb load a human, I'm not sure, but you cannot carb load a dog. You can fat load a dog.
Yeah.
And so typically, if you have a hunting dog, or maybe you're just like a super exerciser, maybe you're a marathoner and your dogs are out there with you, when they start to run out of energy, they need fat, not carbs.
So if we do, so then, we've talked about the, kind of like commercially made weight management diets. They don't work. They're only really going to make the problem worse. Or if they do actually allow the dog to lose weight, they're certainly going to be nutritionally deficient. We don't want to do that, obviously. And so, what are some good ways to do weight management that are actually healthful for dogs?
And so that brings up something important that we were talking about between the two of us just like last week or something. So what if you just take the food that you're already feeding your dog and just feed less of it?
Right.
You are going to nutritionally deprive them.
Right.
Because then they're getting fewer calories overall, but then fewer nutrients. And you could potentially really short your dog and do some damage.
And this is, of course, with commercially made food. If you're
Right.
feeding a fully balanced raw diet, and you want to drop the feeding amount a little bit, it's very nutrient dense and it's
Right.
very bioavailable. And so you're not necessarily going to deprive them of nutrients by feeding them less.
Right. Yeah, less raw food is okay. Less dry food is going to short your dog. And so when you look at like the feeding recommendations on a bag or a can of dog food, they need to eat that much in order to get enough nutrition. And that's one of the major ways that you end up with a fat dog.
So the first thing that we would obviously say with what we were just talking about is, if you are feeding a processed food diet, to switch them onto a raw diet is going to do a tremendous amount for weight management just by itself. You're going to watch, we've had it countless times with clients where you just make that switch and they just naturally end up at a much better weight. And it doesn't really even take that long.
No, it happens pretty quickly. And one of the things I get a lot is that when I have clients who are just starting on a raw diet, they'll typically email me, not everyone, but often. I'll get an email within a month or two and they'll say, oh my gosh, I'm really concerned. Fluffy has lost so much weight. I can feel his bones. Now I'm very worried about him. He's lost a lot of weight very quickly. And then what we'll do is we'll put Fluffy on the scale and surprise, Fluffy weighs exactly the same as he did before. But now he's got muscle instead of flab.
Oh, got it. Traded fat for muscle.
Right, and so a lot of times the diet alone will just do that. And people are amazed that their dog still weighs 80 pounds, but he's got a leaner figure.
So feeding that fresh food diet, really getting rid of the carbs, so more of that ketogenic style diet is going to do a tremendous amount by itself, and you're still feeding a decent amount of food.
Right.
This isn't even, you definitely want to, when you're doing fresh food, we want to make sure that we weigh the food. We're not going to eyeball anything because that can also get you in a little trouble. Sometimes people are very surprised when they weigh it out. This is how much food my dog needs to eat, because you start with percentage of body weight per day, and they're shocked at how little food it looks.
Right.
And it's dense food. There's no filler in there.
Exactly. They can use all of it. And so consequently, they're pooping a lot less. They're pooping less often. Yeah, because they can use all the nutrition in there.
So don't let, weighing that food, if it doesn't look like enough, don't let that scare you. You're going off of where kind of ideally you want them to be. There's a lot of factors to take into consideration when you figure out how much to feed on a raw diet. There's, you have to take into consideration age and activity level, and are they spayed and neutered? And we cover all of that in our raw feeding guide. We give really good feeding guidelines in there of how to kind of narrow down what your range should be on how much you're feeding. But don't be surprised if you weigh that food into the bowl and you're like, wow, that doesn't look like much, especially if you're coming from kibble, because you have to feed a lot of kibble.
Right.
Comparatively speaking, it's going to look different.
Right. And I learned my lesson for several years. I weighed their food at first and I was like, I got this. I know what I'm doing. Between my husband and myself, we grossly overfed our dogs and made them fat. So they can get fat with raw food too. And then, I constantly accused him of overfeeding the dogs because I knew what I was doing. And then one day I thought, I'll show him, and I got the scale out. Man, was I feeding them a lot of food.
Oh.
And ever since then, we use the scale every time we feed because we've learned that we are not good judges of how much something weighs.
So, Dr. Levy, let's talk about, there is kind of a psychology, there's an emotional part to this with humans and their dogs, with food. And you and I have talked at length about this, trying to figure out that psychological connection. But a huge part of what can contribute to dogs being obese is too many treats, and the wrong kind of treats. But definitely too many treats, or just too many chewies, or too much food, or there's this overindulgence of treats. And I think there's this kind of connection that we make where we feel like we're feeding the dog, we're making the dog happy. This is how I show my dog I love them. And some people just kind of do that more than they realize they're doing that for that emotional reason. And so, what would be maybe some parameters for somebody to kind of do some checks and balances with themselves? Like, am I feeding too many treats? Am I feeding the wrong kind of treats? Like, how can people think about that?
Well, I think once you do the math, and it is simple math to figure out how much to feed your dog, once you decide how much you're going to feed them in a day, that includes treats. And so you cannot exceed that amount. And overall, we want them to eat more of their food than treats or extras or table scraps. This does not necessarily include fruits or veggies, because those are pretty much indigestible for dogs. But you don't want to overfeed them those either, because you will just give your dog diarrhea. And so it's kind of like Weight Watchers for dogs. Once you decide on a total amount, commit to that, and everything has to fit into that. So on days when I take my youngest dog to training classes, I short him on his dinner, because I know he's going to get treats at class. Depends on the trainer, depends on where you go. Some classes I've used a ton of treats at times. I've used fewer treats. If I use more treats than I've kind of allotted for in the amount that I've deducted from his dinner, I will short him the next day on his food. So that is kind of how I control for that. I don't think it's not as onerous as counting every calorie, or looking up in your little book to see how many calories are in a peanut or something like that. But just overall, if you go by weight, you will rarely be steered wrong.
And I think as far as, the type of treats, obviously, the more whole food ingredients, the better.
Right.
You want to get away from those fillers, those preservatives. So single ingredient treats are wonderful, especially if you're trying to be very diligent about their weight, and you want to really take into consideration for that. So freeze-dried animal parts can make great treats. So lamb lung or beef liver, or tripe pieces, which they're a little stinky, but they're a really good treat. Those are all kind of good options. There's lots of really good freeze-dried raw foods out there too that, they come in kind of a nice little size piece. I love using those for training treats. And so there's a lot of good options out there. Just get a little bit more picky and choosy, and the more you can stay away from those carbs and those fillers, the better off you're going to be.
Right. And some people find that, the really gross treats that have nasty ingredients, of course, those are often the ones your dog likes the best, but your dog is not taking your keys and going down to 7-Eleven while you're asleep. So you do have some control over that. And a lot of people are kind of disappointed to find out that even with treats, you must become an ingredient reader. And if you don't know what things are, Google them. That's kind of what I did when I started reading dog food labels, like on the back of the bag, because I wanted to see what everything was and where it came from and how it was made. And you do kind of need to do the same thing with treats. I mean, there's obviously 15 different words for sugar, but once you learn what they are, then you know to avoid those things. Yeah, because I find that weight loss in dogs is largely about portion control. Obviously, exercising your dog more is always a good idea. I'm sure dogs would love it. That is, maybe some of us don't have as much time in our day. It can be hard to commit to a regular exercise schedule. Your dog does need to get out and about every day. Out and about might be just in your yard, but they do need to kind of get out there and move around. That is what promotes normal digestion, is that diagonal motion of walking and trotting. That's what keeps peristalsis flowing normally. So you do need to do that. But I think, like I said at first, like your fat dog does not want to go for a longer walk. And so deciding that your commitment is going to be fluffy, we're going to get out there for an hour instead of 5 minutes, you'll be calling an Uber to come get your dog. So as they lose weight, they typically become more active. They feel better. They want to walk further. They're spending more time in the yard chasing squirrels. Rather than you deciding that you're going to kind of enforce this.
So as with pretty much anything else that we speak about from, a holistic perspective when it comes to solutions for things, is we want to get to the root cause and work from the inside out. And so the issue is typically going to be a carb heavy diet. That is what gets dogs to a point where they are obese. And so merely by switching the diet and getting rid of those carbs is going to do a ton. And then portion control, so getting the food correct, making sure it's the right amount of food. And then as you move through that process and get the dog healthier internally, making sure they're nourished, they're not overloaded with carbs, then, more activity is going to just kind of be a natural consequence, because they're going to be feeling better. They're going to be lighter on their feet. They're going to want to go for walks. So hopefully this gives a little bit of understanding into, what even is a fat dog? What does it look like? Why isn't it really addressed? If it is addressed, the solution's not usually great.
Right.
These are some real, and they're really quite simple to put into practice. So if you haven't started a fresh food diet yet, we have an amazing guide that we put together. It's very, it's 20 pages long. It gives you the foundational pieces of feeding a raw, fresh food diet, and then you can kind of continue to learn and build from there. But it really is all about feeding the right fresh foods in a wide variety to make sure that your dog is taken care of. We'll link that down in the description below. We're also going to include a chart that kind of shows some body condition. You can find it by itself. It will also be in the updated version of our raw feeding guide. This is something that we just added not that long ago. So if you have our raw feeding guide already from before, know that you can just go ahead and grab that down in the description box below. So in order to keep our dogs living long and healthy lives, this is just one more aspect, one more facet, how we can do that. We want to keep them around as long as possible. Tune in next time on the Crunchy Carnivore podcast. See you then. Thank you so much for joining us. Our goal is always to encourage others to seek out the holistic approach by way of education and empowerment. You can check out our online resources at wellspringhaa.com. You can follow us on our YouTube channel, Wellspring Holistic Animal Academy, and you can also find us on Instagram at wellspring_HAA. We hope that this has been helpful and that you continue with us on your journey to holistic health for your pets. As always, we're here to be unapologetically all natural.